thanks for that presentation, Minister. I want to ask about the legal oversight for the Heritage Fund Opportunities Corporation. Is it identical to what exists for AIMCO, like in terms of auditing, FOIP, and reporting? What are the differences of the new entity?
Well, I would probably let Deputy Minister White go into more detail, Member Kozlowski, but I'd say it'll have a high level of transparency and reporting. I'm expecting quarterly reports. When it comes into legal, the legal answers, I better let Deputy Minister White answer that. But the highest level, diligence, governance is key. The team that's kind of led us through this process made it clear that the sovereign wealth style funds that are most successful around the world really lean on the best governance and transparency, and that's definitely what we're going to build here in Alberta.
Follow up, sir?
Yeah, I'll follow up. I just wasn't sure if the minister was opening up for someone else to provide some answer to that too, but I'll have a follow up.
Actually, you're right. Put you on pause for a moment here while Deputy Minister White answers your question.
Just to supplement the minister's response, so yes, we are expecting we will be putting in place all the same oversight and legal rigor that you would expect with any statutory corporation, but there is a slight difference right now. This is registered as a business corporation with a view to making it a statutory corporation. But our practice thus far and our plan to continue is to use all of the same steps, processes, and procedures that we use with statutory corporations to ensure that highest level of governance, oversight, and arm's length operation for the HFOC board. Thank you.
All right.
Yeah. So follow up would be great, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So today, there's been a lot in the news with some serious allegations reported about another organization under the government, the AHS. So like AIMCO, which had its board unexpectedly fired and replaced, possibly to avoid accountability, what mechanisms are going to be in place with HFOC to assure Albertans, that nothing similar can happen with their Heritage Savings Trust Fund money?
Well, I think as Deputy Minister White said, we're going to have the highest level governance and oversight. I'm not here to comment about the other matter that you mentioned, but I know the Auditor General is looking into that, so we will see what comes from that and make sure that the public purse is, nobody wants to stretch dollars further than me, so we'll see what becomes of that. But Albertans can expect the highest level of governance and oversight with the Heritage Fund. And I would just remind everyone, this is more, not less. When we started this endeavor, it was people within my department, great people, great civil servants that were tasked with the SIP and G and the oversight on the Heritage Fund's investment to AIMCO. This will provide more oversight. We're going to have a board with expertise and experience, and I think it'll be easier to see that for Albertans, and we'll have a dedicated team that's charged with this great task of this ambitious goal of $250 billion by 2050. So yeah, I think it's more, not less.
Mr. Kozlowski, did you have your hand up earlier?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And thanks for the presentations from the ministry and from AIMCO. The day after the public meeting that we had last quarter, the decision was made to fire the board of AIMCO and the executive staff, and Mr. Gilmore is here today as a result. And a similar firing of the board of AHS took place, and we're learning today that the media, it appears that there's been cover-up of political interference and possible kickbacks, and that there was a replacement of the board. And
Point of order has been called.
To prevent investigation.
Mr. Kozlowski, can you
into improper
hold your comments,
contracts.
please?
I need to know, Mr. Chair, were there similar concerns at AIMCO behind the
Mr. Kozlowski, there's a point of order called?
And how can the
you
public
shut off his mic?
trust what the government is doing?
Go ahead, please. Mr. Lunty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to call a point of order of 23B. As member opposite has made his second reference now to AHS, which is clearly not what we are discussing at this committee meeting. I think this is a fairly straight order point of order under 23B that is not relevant to the discussion. Thank you.
Mr. Kennedy, do you have a response?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do not believe this is a point of order, frankly, because the very similar methodologies used with both boards. Now, I mean, AHS board has now been fired a second time. That is definitely a place where there's divergence between what happened between the AIMCO board and the AHS board. But I think that given that this is a meeting for the Heritage Savings Trust Fund, this is a meeting for Albertans. This is Albertans' investments that we're talking about and the management of their investments. I think that it is not a point of order to be highlighting and asking questions about a particular pattern of behavior that this government has shown ostensibly and perhaps in order to avoid accountability. And, like a literally midnight firing or 8 a.m. firing of an entire board and management team on the day after a very public hearing, calls into question whether these are actually whether this is actually how the government wants to operate. So I believe there's a point of debate. I think this is a reasonable question for Albertans to want answers to.
I would ask that you keep it on the business of the second quarter report on the Alberta Heritage Savings Trust Fund. The questions you allude to deal with AHS and the Ministry of Health. Certainly you're aware that estimates are coming up. You'll have your opportunities to ask a lot of those questions then at that time. So, but I'll give you the liberty of just getting to the point of what your question was. Mr. Kozlowski.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, and it's just the timing of the change of executive was the day after our public meeting, and we actually heard Stephen talking about how important it is to have the public paying attention to the Alberta Heritage Savings Trust Fund in his presentation. And so I need to know, were there similar concerns at AIMCO behind the sudden change to their board and their replacement of their CEO, which has happened since the last quarter?
So there was, in terms of the timing of when the board was excused versus the Heritage Fund public meeting was purely coincidental. If there would have been any political interference, I would suggest that the board would not have been let go, and there would have been interference directly in. So purely coincidental in terms of the timing. Obviously, it's not ideal to, in a public manner, let a board go in senior management. One had nothing to do with the other, and there was absolutely no suspicion of political interference in anything to do with AIMCO. Thank you.
With that, next we'll go to Mr. Kozlowski. Go ahead, sir.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And I guess the question is coming back to board members and the conflicts that they have that are cleared by AIMCO. And I just need to understand from AIMCO's perspective and our agility and ability to invest the funds. If you have someone who works with a private equity firm and maybe provides working capital through that firm to Tourmaline or Whitecap Resources or Steelhead LNG or H-Cycle, is AIMCO limited from being able to invest in those Canadian equities as well?
So we have a robust compliance process in place to ensure if there are any conflicts of any nature, they are fully flagged ahead of time rather than and as part of the due diligence process. Now that could be, in very few instances, could be an AIMCO employee, or it could be board members or any of the others that we deal with. And so that's how we've dealt with any of such situations in the past, and that's how we would deal with in the future.
Follow up, Mr. Kozlowski.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think then the question is, I want the fund to have the ability to invest in opportunities. And if there is a conflict, how do we raise that publicly so that then from the public view, we're not going to feel that that the fund is being used to support investments made by board members?
Okay, maybe I'll start with answering a narrower question. So to the extent that there is potentially hypothetically a possibility for a conflict, the various avenues are available, including individuals recusing themselves from the decision, etc. Again, there's a policy and a process in terms of how that happens. The second part, which goes to the heart of your question, is, does that restrict us, AIMCO more broadly, Heritage Fund more specifically, in terms of not being able to invest in certain attractive opportunities? Now, I'll respond to, again, in a shorter sense. Over the years, I've been a part of the investment committee. There are few instances that's come up, but by and large, it isn't relative to our investable universe. It isn't something that that restricts us in any meaningful manner.
To ask questions, but with that, Mr. Gazowski, you have a question online?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, this quarterly report will be, I think, the last quarter before Trump. So now we'll be looking at our financial returns after Trump, after the election, and now we're looking at a future world with tariffs that are pending. So what were the risks calculations that were used to factor political risks like Trump that led to Q2? And then going forward, how is AIMCO accounting for the risk that we are facing with the potential tariffs and the President of the United States?
Thank you for the question. It certainly has kept us busier than usual over the last week and a half. So I'll start the response with a narrow focus, and then zoom out and have a broader response. So firstly, as we looked across the portfolios across the different asset classes, we have a good sense of which part of the portfolios may get impacted by tariffs, particularly if that translates into inflation, and also if it is directly in the sector. So, for example, automotive sector, for example. So as we looked across the asset classes, clearly fixed income through various channels, both through rates channels, potentially growth channels, gets impacted. Public equities, where we are, again, slightly underweight relative to the exposure. There is exposure particularly through the oil and gas sector, through the automotive sector, again, consistent with the benchmark and in and around that. But as you go beyond these two asset classes, if you look at the private equity exposures you have, most of the sectors that we invest in on your behalf tend to be asset-light sectors. So, for example, software technology, business services, healthcare, financials, etc. And then the second part is, again, just focusing on private equity for the moment. Only 5% of those investments are in Canada. So in many ways, they are naturally not, at least directly, impacted by tariffs. I'll take one more example, which is infrastructure. Again, about 10% of the portfolio is in Canada, 52% in the U.S., and as well as about 75% of the portfolio has regulated or contracted revenues, which means if tariffs translate into higher inflation on higher charges or rates, that automatically translates into cash flows for those types of investments. So the first review we did was across the asset classes to make sure we understood where the exposures would be, recognizing that there is a fair bit of uncertainty in terms of the level of tariffs, the the length of tariffs, the differential sector exposures. The second bit we did just by way of from a process perspective is our risk policy has a provision of developing market and credit risk contingency plans. So we activated it about a week or so ago to see if there was any specific actions we needed to take place at top of the house outside of the asset classes. Again, the assessment was that there wasn't anything we needed to do immediately. And then the third thing is the longer term, how we work with clients in managing portfolios. And so the word you hear in that context is to ensure that the portfolios are resilient. And so we measure liquidity multiple different ways, but one of the headline metrics for the SLCR metric, which is a liquidity metric, it's roughly 300% for the Heritage Fund at the moment. So all of that to say, it leaves room both for opportunities as well as to manage risk, because because liquidity is really important. And then finally, in terms of, as we look at the crystal ball going forward, the way we think and approach about is what are the transmission mechanisms by which the portfolios get impacted. I'll admit, looking at the political crystal ball and assessing, what the U.S. administration may or may not do, that part isn't necessarily a primary focus, if you will, but we're more focused on what's happening on the interest rate side, on the inflation side, on real yields, on currencies, and therefore our portfolios. So that's how we're approaching it, and that's how we look to manage it over the next little while.
Now, Mr. Kiande, please go ahead with your comment.
Yeah, I'd like to move a motion, please, which I believe we've made available to the committee clerk. Oh, there it is. That the Standing Committee on the Alberta Heritage Savings Trust Fund hold a 2-hour public meeting no later than May 31st, 2025, the Queen Elizabeth II Building, to address the recently announced changes with respect to the management of investments of the Alberta Heritage Savings Trust Fund. Our rationale is that the last public meeting of the Alberta Heritage Savings Trust Fund happened on November 6, 2024. The following day, the board of AIMCO, the CEO of AIMCO, and 3 other executives were fired by the Minister of Finance because the government chose to gut AIMCO's management and restructure the Alberta Heritage Savings Trust Fund to now include a Crown Corporation to grow the trust fund. The content of that meeting and the public questions are inoperative. As a result, the public should have an opportunity to meaningfully engage with AIMCO and Treasury Board and Finance about the substantial changes that have been made to the Alberta Heritage Savings Trust Fund and the investment management of the fund. They deserve an opportunity to do that as soon as possible. The Heritage Fund belongs to the people of the province, and they have the right to fully understand these changes.
Okay, we have a motion, thank you very much, on the board here. Are there any comments, questions, debate on this? I see none. So with that, we will take it to a vote. Anyone who supports this recommendation in the room, please say aye. On the phones, anyone who's supportive of this recommendation, please say aye.
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 I recognize Mr. Ellingson and Mr. Kozowski. Okay. Okay, all in the room who are opposed to this motion, please say no. No. Online, all opposed to this motion, please say nay or no.
No.
Nay. No.
Okay, that motion is defeated. Thank you very much. We will